if aviation is your passion, even if it's kind of in the back burner, like, man, I'm a pilot or I'm really interested in aviation, is there a spot for me somewhere? And I'm going to say, yes, there is.
How many people go through life doing work they really don't like, but every day dreaming of, say, working in the aviation industry? They say it's too late. They think it would be too hard. They think it would go against conventional norms. If you never go after what you want, you'll never have it. This is Fly the Transition. Join us as we soar through the captivating stories of individuals embracing a thrilling journey into the aviation industry. From pilots spreading their wings to mechanics fine-tuning the engines and a myriad of industry professionals, each with a unique tale to tell. Get ready to dive into the diverse backgrounds, the pivotal moments that propelled their leap, and the sheer determination that transformed their aspirations into reality. Welcome to Fly the Transition. And now your host, Jim Schilling.
Welcome, everyone, to a new episode of Fly the Transition. Whether you're new here or a seasoned veteran, I am happy that you're here. So for this episode, I am happy to welcome Kyle Lewis. He is a regional manager with AOPA for the Great Lakes region, which is where I happen to reside. But before that, he was a state trooper in the state of Ohio. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to highlight Kyle specifically is because he's not in one of your traditional quote-unquote pilot jobs. Part of what I want to explore with Fly the Transition isn't just those jobs in aviation where you can jump on the flight deck and fly an aircraft, but also all those jobs that support the flying operations themselves. And that includes everyone over at AOPA as well, who do a lot of advocating for general aviation, a lot of educational programs, flying clubs, things like that. So we're going to get right into it with this episode and welcome aboard Kyle Lewis with AOPA. All right, well, Kyle, thank you for joining me on the Fly the Transition podcast.
Glad to be here. Glad to be doing another podcast with you. I've enjoyed the last couple I've done, so ready for another.
Great. Well, this has been a long time coming, Kyle. I really do appreciate you coming on, and I look forward to chatting with you about your story and sharing that with others. So, should we get started?
Let's get started. Happy to share.
I think we'll start off with how you first got exposed to aviation. For
me, that's kind of hard to pinpoint because, going back even even young memories, right, as a little kid, always had some kind of, toy or something that was airplane related, right?
Yeah.
I remember I was probably 4, maybe 5, and I remember the Cox, like 2-stroke powered little engines that they had on like the string airplanes.
Okay.
And I think my grandpa, it was a helicopter. It was white, I think white with red stripes or something, but it had one of those little glow-powered Cox engines on it. And I think the thing was dangerous as heck, probably, for a 4-year-old.
Yeah.
Because, it was literally, you like wound the thing up and you put this glow starter on it and it ran, and then you just literally like stepped back as quick as you could and it just went. There was no control to it whatsoever. So probably go 30, 50 feet up in the air, then come back down. But, played with that thing for hours when I was a little kid. I remember I had it was like the RC racing cars. Remember those? Like the black track, and it smelled like electricity. And
yep.
Those with airplanes, the same thing with airplanes, racing airplanes. But, that's when I was young. And then exposure through model aviation, RC,
Oh, okay.
Started that probably when I was about 8 or 9 years old. And I still fly those today. Obviously the technology has changed quite a bit.
For sure.
Everything is electric now. It's amazing. My first airplane ride that I can remember, other than an airline, but my first, small airplane ride was in a Waco biplane.
Oh.
And it was, vacation, on vacation, family vacation. I was probably 6 or 7 years old. In fact, I've got a picture. It's hanging up on my wall here. But when I was a little bit younger, we flew to Hawaii to visit my aunt, who lived over there, and flew to Chicago. And then from Chicago to Hawaii was on a 747.
Oh, wow.
I'm like 5, and I remember, remember everything about this. But we were on a delay in Chicago. I don't know if it was weather or mechanical or whatever it was, but everybody got off the plane. And the pilot, as we were exiting, said, "Hey, do you want to sit up front?" Well, I mean, that's kind of a no-brainer, right?
Oh, for sure.
So, I mean, I remember to this day sitting on the pilot's lap in the cockpit of a 747, flipping all these switches, and and he was let me talk on the PA system, and I was up there. My mom said I was up there for 2 hours on this delay. So that's kind of what I remember, very early into aviation. But ever since then, I've been around the RC aviation groups, all through high school, and then college started the flight training. Right out of high school into college, started at Ohio University in their Part 141 program.
Sure.
And I had some really good exposure at Ohio University. It's just one thing to go to all the classes, do your flight training, and then do all the college stuff. I was actually lucky enough to work as a student worker at the airport in the FBO. It was a university-run airport, university-run FBO. Set up like any other FBO. Line service, airport maintenance, the whole 9 yards. So I was lucky enough to be able to do a lot of different jobs around the airport, learn a little about airports, kind of shadowed the airport manager while I worked there.
Okay.
And then kind of coincidental, I was offered a student worker job in the Ohio University Avionics Engineering Center. This is kind of a one-of-a-kind. It's really a laboratory when it's really boiled down to what it is. But it's a graduate program at Ohio University, avionics engineering specifically.
Okay.
But it's kind of a mix of computer science, computer engineering, and electrical engineering. That's where the avionics parts come in. So a lot of the students that were in the program, they were not really aviation minded. They were electrical engineers, and it was a graduate program. So I worked in the hangar. They had a DC-3, Piper Saratoga, a Turbo 210, Bonanza, King Air C-90, and they also had an L-29 Delphin.
Oh, wow. So
that was a very unique experience just to be exposed to different airplanes. I did get flight time in all of them, which was pretty nice, even the DC-3. In fact, my first trip to Oshkosh was in that very DC.
Really? Perks of the program, I suppose, is you got to get some hours in those planes, right?
Well, yeah, and they flew them as research gathering aircraft.
Okay.
So they were all, in fact, the L-29, they purchased it for inertial GPS testing, and they needed something that could pull some Gs.
Yeah.
And they needed something that was, high speed, 250 knots, which they did get a waiver to go faster when they needed to. But yeah, it was pretty interesting. A lot of different things. I remember, putting an antenna on the King Air, and we took it to Alaska as part of the Capstone project, which was ADS-B data collection before anybody knew what ADS-B was.
Okay.
This was in like 2001, way before anybody even knew that ADS-B was a thing. And so it was a collaboration with NASA, the Air Force, DOD, FAA, and a couple other research universities. And they also went to Cape Canaveral later on and did some testing down there for ADS-B. I remember I flew as not a test pilot, but a test subject pilot in the early days of what they were collecting data on synthetic vision. It was really interesting. They took the Piper Saratoga, and on the kind of up on the cockpit, on the kind of what you call the A-frame, the window, LED light strips that would go red, yellow, green, and then yellow, red. And we went out and flew at night. We did about, 12, 15 hours of test flying, and they wanted pretty much instrument conditions almost. So we went out at night. Wore foggles a couple times, had a safety pilot in the right seat, and we would go out and do unusual attitude in the Saratoga. And literally, how fast can you correct the airplane to get the LEDs lined up to green, right?
Okay.
And they were just data collecting, all the algorithms for the synthetic vision programming based on pilot inputs.
Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself here, but this begs a question for me. I know where you ended up after college and the career path you took, so what led you away from more aviation-related career right out the gate?
When I left Ohio University, or when I graduated from Ohio University, the aviation market overall was kind of in a slump. This is like 2004.
Okay.
Right? It was after 9/11. Costs were going up. Airlines really weren't hiring. Entry-level jobs into aviation didn't pay a whole lot. I remember a lot of my classmates went to AirNet and literally flew canceled checks at night, pretty crappy conditions, and they had a day job that they worked. Now, granted, a lot of those guys moved on to the airlines now, and that was good for them. But for me at the time, I really didn't want to get into that kind of flying. And I've never really wanted to be an airline pilot. So the ends really didn't justify the means to go fly for AirNet. I did interview at Pittsburgh International Airport in like a security administration job, not TSA, but the airport security side of things. It didn't pay quite, what I was looking for, and I have to move to Pittsburgh. So there's a lot of logistics things there. And the same thing, a aircraft paint shop located in Eastern Ohio, family-run business. Interviewed with them. They were looking for kind of an operations manager and somebody to ferry airplanes basically from their paint shop to Cincinnati to the interior shop that they worked with.
Okay.
Which would have been great, probably lots of flight time, learn how to paint airplanes, because they told me, said, if you take this job, you're going to be a jack of all trades. Family-run business. The old man, that started the business was kind of getting out of it, and they were looking to kind of sell to the employees. I think I would have enjoyed it, but at the same time, it was kind of a risky move, just given that it was not a fledgling business, but just kind of that changeover process.
Yeah.
And all during the same time, and kind of the big washing machine of what am I going to do? I'd already applied for the Highway Patrol in Ohio. And was going through that process, which pretty lengthy overall, just to even get in, probably about 2 years from when I applied. Actually, I applied before I graduated.
Okay.
A couple of my high school buddies, that's what they went into. They said, well, Patrol has airplanes. Why don't you go fly airplanes for the state of Ohio? What do I have to lose, kind of thing. So that's where I ended up after all the wash came out.
So were you flying with the state then?
So no, I was never assigned to the aviation section.
Okay.
By the time I got in, you had to have a certain amount of seniority.
Oh yeah.
And you had living within a certain distance from OSU Airport. They kept changing some requirements. They changed our retirement system, so some guys didn't retire. The full time flying thing with the Patrol just didn't hash out. But I did get to fly with them on occasion when the schedule worked out. I'd go up and meet them, or they'd fly down and pick me up and go out on some Highway Patrol aviation missions, which were varied. At that time, they were not using drones at all.
Yeah.
That has replaced some of the mission of the aviation section, because with the Patrol, they would use aircraft for number one, speed enforcement. That was the main thing. You go fly circles literally for hours, and it's stopwatches. And some of these guys were really good. They'd have 4 stopwatches going at the same time.
Oh wow!
Watching 4 cars in the speed zone. So it was always interesting to watch them, how they work.
So what brought you down the avenue of law enforcement then? Was there something specific about it? Do you have like family in it, or just something that sounded interesting? Or?
I did have family in it. So my grandfather was actually a policeman in our local town. My brother is still a full-time sheriff's deputy here in Ohio.
Okay.
So yeah, I guess there was a little bit of a family run in law enforcement. But I think at the time when I went in, it was kind of one of those things. It sounded like a good idea. Seemed like a stable career. The retirement was pretty good. Already knew some people on the inside, so to speak.
Okay.
And that's really, there was really no big draw to law enforcement. There wasn't like I didn't find it as a calling, so to speak.
Gotcha.
But yeah, I enjoyed my time there for sure.
So were you with the State Patrol the whole time? Did you work other agencies or?
No, just Highway Patrol.
Okay.
For the whole 10.5 years.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Within that role, and now I know what the State Patrol does in my state, or Highway Patrol, it gets used interchangeably, but what was your role within your organization?
So the Highway Patrol in Ohio, we were not a state police.
Okay.
So technically, we were not peace officers.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Technically, we were not. The Highway Patrol had their own academy.
Yeah.
It was all in-house. Now, they would run what they call basic police, or basic peace officer training through the Highway Patrol. They were contracted through OPATA, which is the Ohio Peace Officer Training Association.
Okay.
So they were accredited to train peace officers, but state troopers were more of a state role.
Okay.
Not local law enforcement.
Sure.
We did not have jurisdiction on private property unless it was an active felony. That's the only time we could go on private property or in an investigation. Now we backed up, local law enforcement quite a bit. They would call us for assistance, and at that point, once we were requested by a local law enforcement agency, we had rights to be there.
Okay.
So, but there's not very many states left that are like that.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that before. So.
Yeah, Ohio was purely a highway patrol, so public roadways and state property.
Okay.
It was speeding tickets, traffic citations, crash investigations, and all that. Then we did have kind of a detective squad, plainclothes investigators that did prisons, state facilities.
Oh, okay.
Things like that. So
in that career, what did you find as some of like the pros and cons of your adventures in law enforcement?
I'll start with the good things. I think number one, it's just it's a noble career path. I'll just say that it's the media the last few years have really kind of been against the police, et cetera. But any career, any line of work, you're going to have those bad apples.
Sure.
Right? It really doesn't matter. I'll say this, my time there, 99% of the people I worked with were probably the best people you'd ever want to meet. Right. Same for aviation. There's aviation is full of great people, but every once in a while you kind of run into the jackass. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I think obviously it's a very noble career. There's lots of room for advancement. It's kind of one of those careers where you can take it as far as you want. If you really want to work your way up the promotion ladder, go for it. The way the patrol was set up, you had trooper, sergeant, lieutenant. That was kind of your local post.
Okay.
So post commander, shift sergeants, and then kind of boots on the ground. But then district level, captain, then staff lieutenants, and then district staff, motor carrier enforcement. So big trucks, weighing trucks, truck inspections, that whole organization, the investigators, dispatchers, all of that. So it's a very noble career path. Lots of room for advancement. Specialty positions, dog handler, they had drug intervention specialists, aviation, almost endless on what you want to do. Crime lab, if you want to get into that kind of thing. Being the state agency, you had a lot more resources available than, let's say, a small local police department. A lot of stories on the pros. There's very good people to work with all around. I still have really good friends that are still there, and we talk every day. So, the cons, the schedule was horrible. I worked every single holiday for 11 years, unless I took vacation time, months in advance. And even then, it wasn't guaranteed based on availability and staffing and all that. Everything was seniority based, from your days off to what shift you're going to get. It wasn't you reach in a hat, pull out, I get day shift, this week. When you signed the shift bid, you were on midnights, maybe for 6 months, with Tuesday and Wednesday off. That seemed to be a very popular shift that I had for a long time. Worked weekends, overtime was almost a going to happen sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So your 8-hour shift easily turned into a 10-hour shift or 12-hour shift. The scheduling was pretty bad. If you want to go have fun, really couldn't do it if you had to go to work at 10 o'clock that night.
Right.
There wasn't a lot of social time. Some of the other cons, a lot of what you did not control what happened on your shift, so to speak. Everything was at the mercy of just whatever happens.
Yeah, you're like a slave to the radio then.
Yeah. A lot of time, the overtime opportunities were, every day you could find overtime opportunity. Some of the other cons, it's not exactly the safest job in the world either. A lot of people would say, well, are you worried about getting shot? This or that. That's really not the scary part. It was the fact you were in a car 8 hours a day, out on the road, and as car crashes or standing next to the highway or crash investigation or whatever you're doing, you're out there, in that environment, and it's not very forgiving. Kind of like aviation, it's situational awareness all the time. And a coworker of mine, this was pretty early on in my career, he had a car stopped on a 4-lane highway, and at that time they'd already passed the move over, slow down law, which I'm almost certain every state has that.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, a car didn't, and literally his radio that was on his duty belt, the car clipped that and hit his radio. So he, car was going 60, 70 miles an hour. And luckily, 2 inches the other way, he probably wouldn't be with us today.
Right.
So, but yeah, probably just the environment you're working in, you're out in the cold, the rain, whatever it is, you're out there in it. Snow days were horrible. if there was any time to call in sick, it was on a snow day. But snow days, I mean, in southern Ohio, it was a little different. We don't get the big amounts of snow like Cleveland and Toledo and all that. We get ice, we get the freezing rain, we get maybe 3 or 4 inches of snow, and it would just be chaotic for the whole shift. So
that's almost worse, that freezing rain on the bottom and then you put snow on top of it. And those people in California are listening, they have no idea what we're talking about.
Well, some parts of California they do, but
we'll go Southern California.
Yeah. So they have no idea. But the snow days were the worst for sure. I remember it was it was probably 2015. It was December 29th. I remember the date. That's how bad it was. I had just got home. I had worked a day shift for some reason, and I had just got home, and I was kind of remodeling the kitchen in the house I had bought at the time, and my phone rang, and it was the captain of our district. He said, "Hey, we're calling people back in." He said, "It's getting pretty bad out." And I'd been home for a couple hours and really hadn't paid attention, so I kind of peeked out the window, and there was snow sticking to the road. And he said, "We're expecting to get about an inch of ice," and he said, "We need you to come back in." I got back in there about 6:30 that evening, and I didn't get back home until almost 7 a.m.
Wow.
This is how bad it was. A fire truck slid into an ambulance at a crash scene and tipped both of them over. Oh. It was just horrible. I mean, it was, it was just chaotic. And that was probably the worst day and night that I can remember working in those conditions.
Yeah.
But, and then some of the other cons, aside from the schedule and the environment, it's an ever-changing career field. When I mean ever-changing, the policies were always changing. You were always training, which isn't a bad thing. But at the same time, you can kind of be the overtrained, I think, to the point where on some things, you just don't care. It's like, I've been doing it this way for 5 years. What's the point in changing now?
Sure.
And there were certain things that were a little overthought, overbaked, that they thought they were good ideas and then they really weren't. I think during my tenure in the patrol car, we obviously had a shotgun as a defensive weapon. And those were placed strategically in police cars. You see them in the movie, sometimes they're between the seats or whatever. When I started, they were actually on the roof, on the ceiling, of the patrol car. In my time there, they moved the shotguns 4 times, and every time they moved them, you had to go back to training. Right? It was retrain, and same thing, just different policies. Staying up on different laws that would change. That was an ever-changing landscape. And it really wasn't dealing with the people. Everybody thinks you're dealing with drunks and idiots and all this kind of stuff. That really wasn't the hard part at all, because that's just people skills when you boil it down. So those are some of the cons. And then I think too, I know a lot of guys get frustrated in that promotional process where they're trying to get sergeant and they've got that goal focused, and then politics of the district would come into play and they wouldn't get promoted or whatever. So anyway. But I think that's the pros and cons, at least from my perspective.
I want to go back on something you said, because it segues nicely into my next question. You talked about the importance of situational awareness as a trooper, but how important that is in aviation too. So with that, and in addition to that even, what skills were transferable for you from the law enforcement background to your work in aviation?
So that's a really good point. It's interesting, how there is the, like the 5 or 7 bad habits, right? Or the deadly habits, complacency, decision-making. You go down through that list. It plays very well into both career fields. Poor decision-making, obviously, kind of want to get it done, get it over with kind of thing. Not going through a checklist. We really didn't have checklists, but you kind of get in a rhythm of what you're doing. Like on a traffic stop, right? Every traffic stop is supposed to be different. Walking up to a car, there's a certain way you do it. you hold your flashlight in a certain hand.
Sure.
Had to remember, turn your microphone on. Is your camera on? The whole 1, 2, 3 kind of thing. The way you park a patrol car is important. So with all these little things, you do 1 or 2 things wrong, and if something does go bad in a situation, that could really, really hurt you. Kind of the same thing in flying, right? You don't pre-flight properly, or you don't, maybe you miss switching fuel tanks at a certain time, or whatever it is. The little things, kind of that Swiss cheese model, right? Where all the bad stuff lines up at the same time. So that all kinds of, plays into each other very well.
Before we get into the rest of Kyle's story, just a quick word from those that make the Fly the Transition podcast possible. Aviation friends, let me share with you an absolute game changer in eyewear. I am personally hooked on Flying Eyes optics. Their stylish designs pair seamlessly with your headset for superior comfort. I used to fly with those cheap gas station sunglasses, but since switching to Flying Eyes, I can't go back. They're sleek, durable, and way more comfortable. Trust me, your eyes deserve the upgrade. Check out our affiliate link in the show notes, and make sure you use code FlyingMidwest10 for an unbeatable 10% off your purchase at Flying Eyes. Fly with comfort, fly with style. Visit Flying Eyes Optics today. Let's talk about some of the best active noise reduction headsets on the market. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just taking flight lessons, Lightspeed Aviation headsets are engineered with you in mind every step of the way. They've created the quietest and most durable A&R headsets on the market. Their high quality and innovative technology ensures you stay comfortable, connected, and safe in the cockpit. I've personally flown with Lightspeed for over a decade, and I wouldn't dream of flying with any other headset. Elevate your flying experience with Lightspeed. Check out our affiliate link in the show notes so that you can support the podcast with your next purchase.
You're listening to Fly the Transition. If you've ever thought about changing careers and getting into the aviation industry, welcome to your new home. Now, back to your host, Jim Schilling.
So at some point in time, you decide that you are going to explore something different. Was there a certain catalyst that moved you towards looking at a career outside of law enforcement, or just an opportunity, or something else?
There wasn't a specific event that said, I want to get out of here,
Okay.
I think it was a culmination of, I kind of got to the point where it was either I'm going to stick with it long term, or it's time to look at something else, And literally, I think it was more opportunity than it was seeking something out. I've been an AOPA member since I started flying. Was reading the ePilot newsletter, literally at the post one night, just kind of looking through it on the phone.
Yeah.
And at the bottom, career opportunities, AOPA, and it's a regional manager, Great Lakes. So I clicked on the little link in the email. It took me to the job description, and it was very, very vague. It was like represent general aviation in the Great Lakes region, and here's the requirements. Minimum private pilot, experience with public speaking, state governments. So I got that covered. FAA, processes and all this kind of stuff. I'm like, well, what's it going to hurt to throw the application in, right? So literally, I think the next morning or the next afternoon, kind of got on the laptop and cleaned up my resume, which literally I had not touched since college. It's hadn't really even done much to it. So cleaned it up and wrote the cover letter and emailed it in. And I thought, well, we'll see what happens. And a couple of weeks went by, and I got a call one day. Not an email saying, hey, can you call this number, or we're interested in you, or it was literally just a cold call. And it was at the time the vice president of Airports and State Advocacy. Her name was Dawn. I forget her last name at the moment, but we just chatted for about half an hour. It was very conversational on the phone. She kind of wanted to know my aviation background. She liked the fact that I wasn't, full-time in aviation as a corporate pilot or something like that.
Yeah.
Liked the fact that I'd been on an airport authority, the Ohio University Alumni Advisory Board. So it's still connected in aviation, on the fringes. That built the airplane, so it was actively flying. So she kind of liked the what she called grassroots aviation, right? Say your average Joe pilot sort of thing.
Yeah. Okay.
So she liked that aspect of it. And she said, well, would you be willing to do a panel interview with somebody from, human resources and some other regional managers? I went, yeah, that's great. So I think it was the following week, we set that up. That's where it's kind of more the meat and potatoes questions in the interview process. Very focused on, FAA funding.
Okay.
What would you do in this situation? How would you handle, an angry member of AOPA that, they're upset about something that was in the magazine that didn't kind of meet their expectations, or, it's kind of meat and potato questions. Yeah, I felt it went pretty well. Still very conversational. Talk a little about me, and highway patrol, what I was doing, and that sort of thing. And then the next step after that, they said, well, thanks for everything. We'll be in touch, like thumbs up, appreciate it. And this was all on Skype,
Okay.
Back then, Skype wasn't even Zoom yet, still Skype. And then like a month went by, I didn't hear anything. I'm like, oh, well, somebody else got us. But I kept checking the webpage to see if they hired anybody, and nobody had ever showed up. Well, that's kind of weird, So kept, a couple other weeks go by. It was one morning, I got home from work and I just laid down. I worked night shift and my phone rang. It was a Washington, D.C. number. Came up on the phone. I'm like, who's calling me from D.C.? So the way I should answer it. And it was the Secretary, Administrative Assistant for Jim Kuhn, the VP of Government Affairs.
Okay.
And she said, are you still interested in this position? She apologized for it taking so long, but there's been some turnover in the department and, a couple of things got lost in the jumble. Jim would like to set up a time to chat with you, the next few days, if you can do it. I was like, yeah, I'm still interested and be happy to do it. So me, I'm Googling Jim Kuhn, like, who is this guy, right? So learn all I can about him. Really interesting guy. A lot of time in D.C., his entire career at D.C. Chief of Staff of the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, worked for Senator McCain, Duncan in Alaska, a lot of high profile, political background.
Sure.
And still to this point, even after all the conversations and the interview with the other regional managers, I still wasn't 100% solidified on what the job entailed, right? So I'm still trying to okay. So I started reading some things the other regional managers have been, putting on the webpage, and there's a lot of airport stuff going on. There's a lot of legislative lobbying, basically. Does anybody really know what a lobbyist does? I mean, it's kind of like one of the magical, things that nobody can really define it, right? It was funny. That was one of the things Jim asked me about. He said, well, what do you think a lobbyist does? It was just like, well, it's funny you ask. But the interview with Jim went well. Still very conversational. It was about a 20-minute talk, and thank you for your time, and we'll be in touch. The more I thought about the job after that interview, kind of shed a little bit more light on, okay, here's what they're looking for. They need somebody that's, pretty schooled up on FAA processes and working close with state DOTs and all that. So I'm like, well, I'm feeling like I'm in pretty good shape. So I remember when I got the call from AOPA's Human Resources, I was at the Patrol Academy for an in-service training. I think it was lunchtime. The phone rang, Frederick, Maryland, and I answered it, and it was one of the HR specialists, and they said, so we'd like to extend an offer, a job offer. We'll email it to you. Take a couple days to think about it, and just give us a call back. I hadn't even got the email yet. Already on my way back from the in-service, driving to the patrol post, local post, to turn in my 2 weeks notice. So I really didn't even have to think about it that much, but I did talk it over with my wife, and, I had not been really in the corporate world, even though it's not right, but it's still that corporate world.
Oh, sure.
So it was a little, still a little, nervous and like, is this a long-term thing? And it's worked out really well.
Well, you kind of already answered my next question about, what was the thought process or what you considered before making the move. It sounds like once they put the offer out there, like, yeah, see ya.
Yeah,
I'm ready.
It kind of was. It was one of those deals where I already knew what the next 10 to 15 years would look like,
Okay.
where I was, right? And to be honest, at that time in the Highway Patrol, we had gone 8 years without any raises at all.
Oof. Okay.
I mean, no cost of living, no merit increases, no bonuses. You're a state employee, you don't get bonuses, right? Everything was very structured. There was no negotiating a salary. There was no negotiating anything. It was, you fall in this pay range. Here's your pay range. And, the corporate world was a little bit different, obviously. The pay was comparable. So that really wasn't a factor. I think really the deciding factor was, at the time I had a brand new baby.
Okay.
Well, he was ready to turn one at the time.
That's still pretty new, Kyle.
Pretty new. Yeah, pretty new. And so I was thinking, you know what? At least with this job, it's going to be more of a normal, 9 to 5, weekends, holidays off. Like that means a lot. Really.
Yeah,
it really truly does. So that was a deciding factor. Yeah, didn't have to wear a uniform. So
that's true.
Or a heavy, vest and all that stuff. It didn't take much to tip me in that direction. The plan B was with the patrol. As long as you left on good terms, you could come back within a year.
Oh, okay.
Here I am at AOPA almost 7 years. So
awesome.
that deal has expired.
And I'm sure it has. So as you've made this move from law enforcement over to AOPA, what challenges did you face when you made that move?
The biggest one was staying awake during the daytime.
Yeah. I suppose that many years, your rhythm is all messed up.
Yeah, I mean, I'd spent, the better part of 10 years working some form of a midnight shift or an overnight shift. 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. or whatever, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., 11 to 7, some form of that for a very long time. And you get used to that. You really do.
That sun gets a little extra brighter during the daytime.
Yeah, it really does. So, I take it, obviously, when I left the patrol and came to AOPA, there was a little bit of a gap there, that I built into the start date.
Okay.
I should have built more time in. I think it was like a Tuesday or Wednesday, and then it was a Monday start. That's not enough time to switch your rhythm. And so anyway, that was a difficult part. The other difficult part, and this is just, I guess, being in law enforcement, you're trained that everybody's lying to you. It's just that training.
Yeah.
So anytime you talk to anybody, you're thinking, well, what's the real story, right? Like you're always trying to dive a little bit deeper than what face value really is. So kind of being back in the normal day-to-day world, civilian world maybe. So that was, not that it was difficult. It was just, you have to kind of retrain how you think in different situations.
Yeah.
So that was interesting. Well, the other thing too was I went through a career of where they literally watched every minute of your shift. We had GPS on the cars. We had at the patrol post, if we were on there doing on station doing things, it was very time is of the essence sort of deal. So here I am working from home, which is entirely different, right? I'm used to being clocking in, clocking out, right? Doing the shift work kind of thing.
Yeah.
And here you are working from home, 9 to 5. Quite a bit of freedom because it was before COVID, and working from home was still kind of a fantasy for a lot of people. Just getting a daily rhythm, I was so used to having such that structured, like my evenings. If I worked an 11 o'clock shift, 11 to 7, I'd start getting ready for my shift at 9:30 p.m.
Yeah,
it was very structured. Got to be here at this point, A, B, and C. When you're working from home and you can walk down the hallway, and I do have a home office, I felt that was very important that I kind of have that environment to work in.
Okay.
Some people working from home, they're on the couch or they're in front of the TV, and that's entirely fine. However you can function. But I had to have kind of that, this is where I want to work kind of scenario. I remember one day, probably still pretty new, a couple of weeks in, it was like a Thursday afternoon. We had just finished up like a staff meeting, conference call thing. And Jim calls me and he says, well, how you doing? How are things going? And really the first couple of weeks with AOPA, he was just making phone calls and getting to know state DOT directors.
Oh, sure.
Other staff at AOPA and just kind of getting the feel for how the organization works. He said, what's the weather like there? And I said, well, it's a pretty nice day. And he said, why aren't you out flying? I'm like, you mean I can go do that? He says, yeah, you work for an aviation association. Go fly.
Okay.
Okay. Don't tell me twice. So, like a Thursday at 1 PM, off to the airport to go burn some holes in the sky.
That sounds like a terrible problem to have.
Yeah, terrible problem to have. But there is a lot of freedom in this job. But I will say this, kind of getting into more of the day-to-day. So my region covers really 3 different time zones.
Okay.
I've got Eastern time for Ohio, Michigan, Indiana. And then you've got Central time, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois. And then certain parts of the year, you have Mountain time in parts of North and South Dakota.
Okay.
That could be, I realized pretty quick that when I call into some of these webinars or meetings that are going on in some of the Western states in my region, oh man, I might be working till 9 o'clock at night tonight. So, that kind of became a realism but the hard part is where you are working from home and it's doing something that you like, you spend a lot of time doing it. 40-hour work week, I say it's very easy that you can put in 60 hours and not even realize it.
Oh, sure.
So kind of that work-life balance can be difficult. And then the travel, I enjoy the travel aspect, but there are times when it does get like, man, I got to get home, turn around, and then go right back out, which is not a complaint at all. It's just being able to manage that, with things that are still going on. So just making that transition into a more fluid work style rather than a very structured day-to-day,
Sure.
I guess is the best way to put that.
So speaking of day-to-day, let's talk a bit about what your role is with AOPA. Can you tell me about what your position is, the area that you cover, and kind of your day-to-day operations?
Yeah, so the official title of the job is Regional Manager, and no, Michael Scott is not my boss.
I really wanted to say like something assistant to the regional manager, but you are the regional manager.
Yeah, there are days I do need an assistant to it would be nice.
Call me up and let me know.
Yeah, but it is regional manager. But I will answer anything. We've been called regional directors, regional administrators, regional whatever. But basically, the reason it's called regional manager is we have there are 7 of us across the country, and it's divided up in the FAA regions.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
FAA Northeast region. So same as the FAA regions, which makes it nice, to kind of follow their borders. But I have 8 states in my region: Ohio, Michigan, then the western states out to North and South Dakota.
Okay.
Even though North and South Dakota do not touch a Great Lake, apparently nobody else wants it.
There are no Great Lakes there. It's a lot of flat nothing.
Well, I do enjoy, Western South Dakota is actually very pretty.
Yeah, I'll give you that.
Yeah, Western South Dakota is nice. North Dakota, I mean, I've been to Fargo. I've been to Bismarck. I've been to Williston, North Dakota. It gets very cold.
Mm-hmm.
It's very windy. And I do understand why there's only 700,000 people that live in the whole state. So it's not a vacation destination.
No.
I'll put it that way. But so that I kind of lump everything to 3 buckets of what I do. Our top priority is state legislative advocacy. So we are all of the regional managers for AOPA. We do register as lobbyists when we need to. In whatever state we have some legislative action going on. If our activity level rises to where we need to register for lobbyists, we do it. Other associations like EAA and even NBAA, they do not register as lobbyists. I don't know why. I don't know if it's just their policy or whatever it is, but we are the only aviation association that registers as lobbyists at the state level.
Okay.
Now there are state associations like airport manager associations or whatever it might be. They may hire a lobbying firm to represent them in certain things. But as far as AOPA interests, we do register as lobbyists when we need to. And that's different in every state. We have, our in-house council, AOPA in-house council. And then we also do contract with a firm that specializes in lobbying to kind of walk us through all the ethics and all the registration processes and any reports that we need to file. Because it does get pretty in-depth especially if there is a lot of activity going on and you're doing certain things, especially spending money in certain states on certain things. You do have to file some reports. So that is a pretty interesting part of the job. There is no official training to be a lobbyist.
That was going to be one of the questions I asked you, like the kind of training involved. So
yeah, that was actually one of my questions when I got hired was, do I go to a school to learn how to lobby? And it's like, nope. There really, obviously there's, seminars and conferences you can go to on lobbying and all this kind of stuff. But the kind of lobbying we do is very specialized. A lot of lobbying firms, they're, big law firms that specialize in everything across the board. They have attorneys on staff that do this sort of thing, and we are not attorneys because it's very specialized. We're looking at aviation-related things, taxes, registration fees, airport regulations. We got into a real estate law in North Dakota last year. So it's specialized, and that's why they want pilots. One of the requirements is to be a pilot in this position. That way we can kind of walk the walk and talk the talk. I don't think it would look very good if AOPA went out and hired a law firm that didn't know much about, number one, the industry.
Yeah.
And or just vocalizing, certain principles of the law. But we do have, obviously, our in-house attorneys. If we do have any legalese questions, we can run it by them, get their opinion, and then move on with what we need to do. So it works very well. And for the most part, I would say when we go talk to a state representative or a state senator or their staff, they're always impressed that, number one, we're pilots, and number two, that we're representing our interests, right? It's actually, we're not a hired gun, so to speak.
Sure.
So I think that does open the door a little wider and a little bit more credibility when it comes to certain things. So,
okay.
But yeah, there is no school for lobbying, so to speak. I did find out.
It's the hard way. So did you cover all three buckets?
No, that was the first bucket.
First bucket. All right. Bucket two.
I forgot about bucket two. Bucket two is, we also spent a lot of time here. These are the airport advocacy issues. And these can range anything from, a member calls us and says, hey, they're rewriting leases at our airport. What can AOPA do to help?
Okay.
Those range from that to the bigger issues like Santa Monica, Reed Hillview.
Oh, yeah.
City that we work that are kind of those long, ongoing, very deeply involved with the city councils and these pilot associations and very strategic long-term issues. So we work those, from the small to the big on the airport issue side. The third bucket is probably the one I have the most fun with, and that's kind of doing the membership outreach, going to events, going to certain conferences, going to the Minnesota Seaplane Pilot, their conference they just had back in September. That's a lot of fun. I'm not going to lie. It's very good fun. I'm glad I can be there and take part in that. But at the same time, I'm there to carry AOP's message. Where there is a vendor or there is an exhibitor, members can go up and talk to us. We're visible and we participate. So I think that's really important that we are involved in those. So do that across the region. I've already got a couple things booked. Over the winter, I'll be up in Chicago area, actually helping out with the safety seminar.
Okay.
Up in west suburbs of Chicago. So, it's a lot of different things. The job is kind of, you're the jack of all trades of AOPA. Even though our state legislative advocacy is the focus, we can go talk about our high school STEM curriculum. We can go talk about air safety. We can go talk about, the unleaded fuel situation. So we have to stay really in tune with all the lines of business within AOPA, so we're able to do our job.
What do you find to be the most challenging part of your new role?
So most challenging part, in my role with AOPA, we deal directly with our membership.
Yeah.
So like this evening, for example, I was on the phone with a gentleman in South Dakota for about an hour and 45 minutes, just walking through, a private airport issue that he's facing. So just working on strategy with that individual member that he can then take to whether it's the zoning board or the city council or even if it's a state licensing question. So really, it's not so much finding that strategy; it's making sure you spend enough time with the individual member, that they feel like they've been served, and that they get the answer that they're looking for. And it's not always the answer they want. That is the tough part. And this is not to any specific situation at all, but it's one of those. You look at a situation, and maybe it's a hangar lease question. And the airport's implementing some new rules or some different lease terms, and the member may not be happy about that. Maybe they've shortened the lease term from 20 years down to 10, or they've increased the rate, the lease rate. As much as we would love to be able to tell that member, no, they can't raise hangar rent. Well, the fact of the matter is airports can do that sort of thing. They're very well within their right to do that sort of thing. So it's education, then arming them with the proper information. And 9 times out of 10, when you do that and you do it well, they come to the correct conclusion after the conversation, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of times they just want to verify that, hey, I think the airport can do this, but can you tell me if this is true or not, right? So I think it's kind of disarming the situation. And then providing them with the black and white, whether it's, state policy or FAA policy or that kind of thing. We try to steer away from rumor and speculation because that doesn't get you anywhere.
Yeah. I'd imagine that's not too dissimilar from some of your roles as a trooper too.
It's pretty close, actually. Because there's, I think I said it in one of your other podcasts, there's your story, there's the other story, and then there's the truth.
Yeah. Right.
So that is a very common situation that we deal with. So it's really getting to the truth of the matter and then being able to make that informed decision.
So the next thing I want to bring up is for a podcast that talks about a transition from, one non-aviation related career into something of aviation, I pretty intentionally reached out to you to come on because you're in a career that, though you have to be a pilot to be in it, it's not necessarily a flying career. Can you tell me a little bit more about how, even though you're not, in the traditional sense of the word, a pilot role, how there's still a way to find rewarding careers within aviation without necessarily being the one flying the aircraft all the time?
In our role, there are certain roles at AOPA that require you to use small aircraft to do business travel.
Sure.
At AOPA, they do have a program. It's called GA Travel. It's run very similar to like a corporate flight department. Now, we don't have a fleet of private jets, but we have some 172s, 182, Bonanza, and then personal aircraft, obviously, or a rental airplane. If we rent an airplane, that then falls under the flight policy for AOPA.
Okay.
So we do use aircraft for business travel, and I use it quite a bit because it makes sense. If I'm going to a function at an airport, it doesn't bode well, number one, to our members that we show up, in a Toyota Camry.
Right.
Now, we don't go crazy with this. We're not out flying every single day, 10 hours a day. We do it when it makes sense and when it makes, budgetary sense, now when it's going to have that impact and make mission critical uses. So, but yeah, I don't fly every single day. The team, though, I will say the government affairs team, regional managers specifically, we're all current. We're all active pilots. And at one point, the requirement was to at least have your private pilot certificate. It wasn't to be current. Now our VP, he's kind of really pushed everybody to at least be current.
Okay.
Because that way we can talk about airspace and we can talk about airport issues and we can talk about all this and go out and actually do what we're saying. Because there are some jobs out there, right, that you're not flying every day, but you're on the fringes of aviation.
Okay.
Law enforcement was like that, right? Or the natural resources officer, his primary job isn't flying. It's, the speed enforcement, or it's the, wildlife control enforcement or whatever it might be. But flying is the tool that they use to accomplish the mission.
Right.
And I think that's where we fall in is, we're not getting paid to transport people by air. we're just furthering AOPA's mission by using general aviation aircraft for mission critical uses. But yeah, there is opportunity with AOPA. They want you to get advanced ratings if you want to get them. I've got my seaplane rating, which was a heck of a lot of fun. And I've been able to use that. It's good to be, especially when you go to these groups, like the Minnesota Seaplane Pilot Association, and you get up in front of that large group of people and say, yep, I'm a seaplane pilot. I know what you guys are facing when you're talking about your private seaplane bases and some of the regulations in the state, and work on things like that. So
yeah, it gives you some credibility, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly.
The final question I have for you is, what advice would you have for people who would be considering a possible career change into something in aviation?
I would say if aviation is your passion, even if it's kind of in the back burner, like, man, I'm a pilot or I'm really interested in aviation, is there a spot for me somewhere? And I'm going to say, yes, there is, especially right now, especially on the airport side, airport management, airport operations, that field is wide open. And you don't necessarily have to have a degree in aviation management or airport management to go do that. Airport managers are really kind of, real estate managers in a sense.
Yeah.
Hangar leases, tie down areas, corporate tenants. It's an entirely different world than, I think some people think. But I know I think the happiest airport managers are the ones at general aviation airports, that deal with the little airplanes and maybe some, corporate jets.
Yeah.
Because you get in some of these big airports, like MSP or, Milwaukee, it's administrative, pure and simple. They are administrators. They've got big departments. They run with big budgets.
Yep.
It's kind of the boom, boom, boom. You get into the general aviation side of things, a little bit more laid back, a little bit more freedom. The airport manager there, like Frederick, Maryland, we work closely with them on a couple of events recently, and he can get out and walk down the tie down line and talk to pilots and look at airplanes and come out and help out with certain events, and you don't see the big airport managers doing that sort of thing. So even though I'm not saying that they don't like aviation. But I think in general aviation specifically, you have more people that are like-minded. And I think that really, really changes the game. But yeah, if you want to go be a pilot, I think there's all kinds of opportunity. If you want a flying job, if you want to go and fly an airplane every day, the corporate world, even if you're retired and you've got the ratings, they're looking for pipeline patrol. They're looking for flight instructor.
Yeah.
There are opportunities that will put you in the seat of an airplane every day if you want to go do it. AOPA, hey, we hire all the time too. There's a lot of positions. A lot of positions became remote during COVID.
Yeah.
They have brought some of those back to Frederick at headquarters just because it made sense to have it there. But, I would encourage you, go to the AOPA website, scroll down to the bottom and look for career opportunities. We have marketing, multimedia, human resources. Just about everything. But no, I really enjoy it. I know the whole team that I work with, they're all very like-minded, kind of like a little family, so to speak.
Well, awesome. I cannot thank you enough, Kyle, for coming on the Fly the Transition podcast. I really appreciate it. And best of luck to you in all of your endeavors with AOPA.
Yeah, thank you very much. Glad you could have me, and I'll try to send somebody your way for the next one.
Awesome. Well, a big thank you once again to Mr. Kyle Lewis. It's always a treat to have him on one of the podcasts. He's a great guest. He does great things with AOPA and loves to share his story as well as the story of AOPA. And again, thank you, Kyle, for sharing one of those more non-traditional, non-flying jobs that exist within aviation. I really hope that this story resonates with others to show you that there are opportunities in aviation that don't involve having to fly the aircraft. So if your love and passion are within aviation, there's still a way for you to get involved and find things that fulfill you within the aviation community. Before I wrap up, just a couple of things that I want to pass along as far as things coming up in future episodes of Fly the Transition. In addition to telling the stories about those who are making the career change in aviation, I've also reached out to some guests that are able to help people as they make their career change into aviation. For example, I've got Keith Roxo, who is a doctor with Wingman Med. They're a great resource for anyone who is going to have some challenges with their medical and needs some guidance on how to navigate that. I'll also have Nick Fialka joining me. He is the host of the Ready for Pushback podcast, which focuses on advice for those who are getting into a career in aviation. I think it's a great segue from the stories here to what can you do about it next. So Nick will join us in a future episode sometime late next month to talk about what that process looks like, as well as his own transition. So coming up next time on the Fly the Transition podcast, we will have Chris McClellan on. So Chris is currently an airline pilot, but he started off in the logistics field and worked on some of the IT tasks within that field as well. So he will tell us all about his former profession, as well as his route to the airlines. Before I go, I just want to say thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Fly the Transition podcast. If you like what I'm doing with the podcast, the best way you can help spread the word is share the podcast with others, or get onto the app or program you're listening to this podcast on, leave a like, rating, and review, and that helps feed the podcasting algorithms to get our podcast out to more people. And if you would like to be a guest or be a part of our Discord community, you can reach out to me at flythetransition@gmail.com. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of the Fly the Transition podcast, and we will see you next time.
You've been listening to Fly the Transition. Life is too short for you not to do what you love. And our passion is to give you all the tools you need to make the transition from doing what you do to being in the aviation industry. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, you can reach out by email at flythetransition@gmail.com. Find us on Facebook at Fly the Transition. And the website for Flying Midwest Media is flyingmidwest.com. Keep soaring. See you next time on Fly the Transition.